Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Cronin. I'm director of the Centre here in Trinity College Dublin for Literary and Cultural Translation. And this is I think it's a rather special evening. A special evening for two reasons. First and foremost, because we're going to hear the poems of Gerry Murphy in German translation. But also, I think for a more selfish reason, is that there are two people who are very dear to me who are here this evening, Jürgen Schneider and Liam Mac Cóil. If you want to get an idea of how important these people are, just take a look around you. None of those books on any of those bookshelves would be here if it wasn't for the pioneering work of Jürgen and Liam, who collaborated with me in the beginning of the 1990s on producing this report on Irish literary translation in the European context, which to some extent was a title that was more an expression of expectation than experience, because there was very little of it. Jürgen did some very, very interesting detective work and discovered that there was an appallingly small number of translations from post-independence Irish literature into other European languages. So with the sort of combined expertise, we produced a report set by the Arts Council, led at the foundation of Literature Ireland. And of course, one of the things that Literature Ireland did was to promote contemporary Irish literature and its availability in other languages. And this is precisely what we have here tonight, one of the results of that kind of collaboration between Irish poets and writers and European translators. So what I would like to do is to introduce you to Liam Mac Cóil, who is a writer, a critic, a remarkable kind of organizer in all kinds of different ways, but who's made an immense contribution to contemporary Irish literature. So I think it's kind of fitting that in this kind of triangulation here tonight, we have very, very different voices from the European continent. Liam.
Okay, good morning to Vihi. Thank you, Michael, for those, I must say, very heartwarming words, bringing back old times when, that we enjoyed, the three of us, and it's great. It was great, still is. You're all very welcome here, whether you're here in person or looking at us, I can't say virtually, because if you're looking at us at home or at wherever you might be on this Globus that we're going to get in motion this evening. Anyway, wherever you are on the globe, you're very welcome. Herzlich willkommen, Céad míle fáilte. It's my great pleasure to introduce these two great eminences beside me. I meant that in terms of literature, poetry, translation. Gerry Murphy, who needs no introduction, obviously, to those who are interested or read or like poetry in Ireland. As far as I know, you've published about 7 books of poetry so far, Gerry, about that. Starting off with A Small Fat Boy Walking Backwards in 1985, and finishing, well, not finishing, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but with the end of, anyway, your latest book is Humours of Nothingness, 2020, and now this, of course. Recently, Gerry was awarded the Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Award to honour outstanding poetry in Irish poets.
They're taking it back.
Why? They couldn't possibly. Unless you're going to say something tonight, I said, God, we'll have to get that back from that fella. I think it's safe. Besides, Gerry is Jürgen Schneider, as Michael said, an old friend of mine, old and dear friend, a writer, an artist, that is in the sense of pictorial, installation, that kind of art, as well as being involved in the art of writing and, of course, in the art of translating. The amount of poets and writers that Jürgen has translated is, to put it mildly, huge. And there's a list of some of them in the back of the book. For example, Steve Dalchinsky, Micky Donnelly, Anne Enright, Seamus Heaney, Jack Hirschman, Alan Kaufman, Ron Cole, Michael Longley, Sean McGuffin, and Keith Ridgway, Carol Watts, and there's, and also Slavoj Žižek is also mentioned. And they're just a tiny fraction of what Jürgen has done. So he's also written many articles and books, and two books which I personally want to mention are his two books on James Joyce, because Jürgen and myself share an interest, if not a fascination, with the writings and the life of Joyce. Okay, that's all I have to say. Will we start, Gerry, with a reading, perhaps? And then maybe we can have a bit of a chat, but certainly a reading first. We'll do the English, your version, the original first, okay. And then we'll ask Jürgen to read the translation, if that's okay.
I was supposed to bring some books with me, and of course, not that I forgot them, but I gave them to people as gifts. And Jürgen was saying they were supposed to be for you, so forgive me. This is based on a letter they found in Stalin's safe after he died. It's called Tito to Stalin, 1948. That's 5 assassins you've sent, Comrade Stalin, 5 failed attempts. If you don't stop, I send 1 to Moscow. I won't need to send another.
Tito an Stalin 1948. Das sind nun 5 Mörder, die du losgeschickt hast, Genosse Stalin. 5 gescheiterte Versuche. Wenn du damit nicht aufhörst, werde ich einen nach Moskau schicken. Ein zweiter wird nicht notwendig sein.
It was Moscow, by the way. It was Moscow.
Could I just say, Gerry, you asked me to say it. I don't think there's any need to say this, but Gerry has got a little problem in
I had a little head situation last year. My tongue had a small bit of cancer, which was successfully removed, but my voice is slightly impacted. So I'm a bit nervous about reading, but...
We can hear you very well.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is one of those everyday things that happens in your life. It's called appeal. Which earthquake? I inquired of the shopkeeper, pointing to the donations box. I'm not sure, he replied. Probably the most recent, or possibly the one before that. Some fucking earthquake anyway.
Aufruf. Welches Erdbeben? Fragte ich den Ladeninhaber und deutete auf die Spendenkiste. Ich bin mir nicht sicher, antwortete er. Vermutlich das jüngste. Oder vielleicht das davor. Irgendein scheiß Erdbeben jedenfalls.
I was reading once upon a time in Shanghai, in Fudan University, and I opened with a particular poem, which it's a bit of a kind of, you know, you're in a particular place and you read the poem, and then afterwards you're thinking, I shouldn't have opened with that. But anyway, it was called The Collapse of Communism. There's no one willing to unravel the mystery except anarchists rummaging in the dustbin of history.
Das Scheitern des Kommunismus. Keiner ist gewillt, das Rätsel zu lösen, außer Anarchisten, durchwühlend die Müllhalde der Geschichte.
No sense keeping to the short ones. I don't know if any of you remember the Pope visiting Ireland in 1979. Pope John Paul II, wasn't it? Yeah. Anyway, he came to Nook, and they were waiting for his helicopter to land, and there was a commentator, a priest, who was talking about the actual apparition in Nook. And he was talking about the actual description written into the church records from the actual people who purport to have seen it. And I was very taken with the actual description. So this is called Vision at Nook. A figure, perhaps John the Evangelist, and behind John an altar, and on the altar a lamb, and behind the lamb a cross, and behind the cross a wet gable wall, and behind the wall a poky interior, and behind this poky interior a dismal view of the countryside, and beyond this dismal view of the countryside, and a little to the right, the Cathedral of Minsk, and behind the Cathedral of Minsk, Stalin laughing.
Mentioning Nook, beware to wear black if you go there. I once did, so there's little dressed in black, and I arrived there probably 11 in the morning, and all these nervous people came towards me. Thank God you're here, priest. The mass has to start. But I was too surprised, and my Latin is too bad to have done it. Mission in Nook, eine Gestalt, vielleicht der Evangelist Johannes, und hinter Johannes ein Altar, und auf dem Altar ein Lamm, und hinter dem Lamm ein Kreuz, und hinter dem Kreuz eine feuchte Giebelwand, und hinter der Wand ein winziger Raum, und hinter diesem winzigen Raum eine trostlose Ansicht der Landschaft. Und jenseits dieser trostlosen Ansicht der Landschaft und etwas weiter rechts die Kathedrale von Minsk, und hinter der Kathedrale von Minsk ein lachender Stalin.
Is there any questions about the... Okay, we carry on. This is based on a poem by Yehuda Mccoy. He's an Israeli poet. It's called War and Peace. It's exhausting, beating swords into plowshares, plowshares into musical instruments into plowshares, plowshares into swords.
Krieg und Frieden nach Yehuda Amichai. Es ist ermüdend, Schwerter zu Pflugscharen zu schlagen, Pflugscharen zu Musikinstrumenten, Musikinstrumente zu Pflugscharen, Pflugscharen zu Schwertern.
This is very appropriate moment, I suppose. The, we all know about evolution, don't we? But there's a possibility that we might de-evolve and start going backwards instead of progressing. So this is de-evolving. At 67, to wake at 4 in the morning, kicking my nose, scratching my arse, and worrying about Manchester United.
Rückentwickelnd. Mit 67 erwache ich um 4 Uhr in der Früh, bohre in der Nase, kratze mich am Hintern und mache mir Sorgen über Manchester United.
This is based on my jogging, which I still do, by the way. Exercise. I'm running into cold, stinging rain beside the storm-tossed river. 2 miles down, 2 to go. Up ahead, Nicole Kidman, positively drenched in Chanel, is giving me her get up them stairs and get out them shorts look. In your dreams, Nicole, in your dreams.
Leibesübung. Ich renne in schneidend kaltem Regen den sturmgetriebenen Fluss entlang, 2 Meilen flussabwärts, nur noch 2. Weiter vorn schenkt mir Nicole Kidman ganz und kein Chanel getaucht, ihren Los die Treppe rauf und raus aus diesem Shortsblick. In deinen Träumen, Nicole, in deinen Träumen.
What are we doing for time?
You okay?
Procrastinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, just slightly.
Yeah.
I'm not going, don't want to interrupt reading, but I
Go on,
like the humour, and I feel it's a sort of a,
Humour, yeah.
okay, I misinterpreted the poem. All right, so I was going to say it's. I was going to say, Gerry, that it was Cork humour, but maybe that is paradox.
There was a tendency in Cork to sort of bring down the,
Yeah.
the pomposity of people and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. I think
Yeah.
I got that from my mother, actually.
Right.
This is called In the Retirement Home. Neil Armstrong leans back in his rocker and points at the moon. I've been there, he declares. Of course you have, replies the nurse. Of course you have.
Im Altenheim. Neil Armstrong, sorry. Kannst du properly, solltest. Im Altenheim. Neil Armstrong lehnt sich in seinem Schaukelstuhl zurück und deutet auf den Mond. Auf den Mond. Ich war dort, erklärt er. Aber ja doch, antwortet die Pflegerin. Aber ja doch.
You can imagine it. I mean, if you said, yeah, you have, of course you have. This is one. I was on my way to work one particular morning, and I saw something on the street, and I said, "What the?" But you'll have to kind of explain it to yourself afterwards. So the poem is called Cortege. Somewhere back at the traffic lights, perhaps, the chief mourning cars may have lost contact with the hearse and then caught up again, only to find the ice cream van slipping along cheerfully behind the coffin. Either that or the ice cream man is dead. I actually saw it in the street. It's just Cortege, funeral car, ice cream van, and then the rest behind it in the car. What?
Trauerzug für Matthew Sweeney. Irgendwo, hinten an der Ampel vielleicht, mögen die wichtigsten Trauerwagen den Kontakt verloren haben zum Leichenwagen, fanden dann aber wieder Anschluss, nur um festzustellen, dass der Eiswagen sich stillvergnügt an den Sarg geheftet hatte. Entweder das oder der Eisverkäufer ist tot.
I discovered about a month later that the actual person who died, he had a request to have an ice cream van behind him. So, thanks for the poem. This is called Sailors, and it's based on a much younger poem by Pablo Neruda. At sea, for all of our storm-tossed lives, we sail at last into some tranquil port, where death greets us dressed as an admiral.
Seefahrer, nach Neruda. Auf See, all unsere sturmgepeitschten Leben lang, segeln wir zuletzt in einen ruhigen Hafen, in dem der Tod uns begrüßt, bekleidet wie ein Admiral.
And this is based on the peace process, which is still, I suppose, still working its way out. It was something that happened to me in a street in Cork. Peace process. A charming English couple have asked me to take their photo on the steps of Shandon Steeple. I readily oblige, but only as I snap them do I notice the Brits out graffito neatly dividing their grinning heads.
Friedensprozess. Ein liebenswürdiges englisches Paar hat mich gebeten, es auf den Stufen zum Schendenkirchturm zu fotografieren. Bereitwillig komme ich der Bitte nach, doch erst als ich abdrücke, nehme ich das Brit Out Graffito wahr, das ihre grinsenden Gesichter trennt.
And here's another one from the, I was up in doing a reading in Belfast during the Féile an Phobal, and I walked through a forecourt of a garage, and I noticed there was a smell of petrol off my shoes afterwards, when I went indoors, but I got a, I switched it a little. This is called Miss Molotov. Because she had walked through a fuel spill without noticing, she arrived at the Peace and Reconciliation meeting smelling like a petrol bomb.
Miss Molotov, weil sie durch eine Benzinpfütze gelaufen war, ohne es zu merken, roch sie beim Friedens- und Versöhnungstreffen wie eine Benzinbombe.
So you can see where inspiration comes from, just the smell of petrol off your shoes and then, oh, okay, I'm at Belfast, right. I'm not sure if it's in here actually, there's, I was reading with a couple of other poets in the rock bar for that festival, and I was on last, and there was a decent crowd there, and I said, when I announced my reading, I said I'm going to start with a poem about knitting, and you can see people in the audience going, knitting, knitting, So this is the poem, it's called Headgear of the Tribe. Bricks on the pavement, ice in the wind, my mother is knitting my first balaclava. It's not in here, I don't think.
No.
No.
No, you want to do a quick translation?
That's a challenge, yeah.
Oh,
There you are.
oh. I think we'll finish up with the next. Will we finish up? Are we okay?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe one or two more?
No, absolutely. Yeah, we've plenty of time.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
Plenty of
Over-
time.
It's only 6:20.
Yeah.
So we're...
Always there, what? No. No.
You're doing well, go on.
Okay, I don't know if you remember a particular Taoiseach or Prime Minister was from Cork, Jack Lynch, and there's a connection between Jack Lynch and Che Guevara because Che Guevara's grandmother was a Lynch from Galway, their Galway. So this is about the connection, basically. Sean Guevara Lynch. When you heard of Shea's execution in Higueras in '67, did you allow yourself a little tug of regret, if only for a long-lost kinsman, not to mention a hint of admiration for his devotion to duty, if not even envy for this abrupt dispatch? There, for 6 All-Ireland medals and the millstone of Cork around my neck, goes Commandante Jack. Didn't go down well at home, by the way.
Did it?
Oh, millstone of Cork? Oh.
So this is in fact the very first poem I translated from Gerry's.
Ah.
And I had selected it for an anthology I was editing about Cork literature, but everything I had selected got into in the edition, but this one was left out, and the publisher never gave an explanation why. No, the millstone is waiting. Sean Guevara Lynch, als du von Sheas Hinrichtung hörtest in Higueras 67, hast du da ein klein wenig Trauer zugelassen, wenn auch nur um eine lange verlorene Verwandten, vielleicht aber auch ein Hauch der Bewunderung für seinen Tatendrang, wenn nicht gar Neid wegen seines jähen Todes, 6 All-Irland-Medaillen und den Mühlstand von Cork um den Hals, alles auch mich erwischt, Kommandante Jack.
Trying to find one that's actually, yeah, this that goes with that. It's I went on a trip to Havana in 1992 with a small group of students from UCC, and the guy who was in our sort of leader, we used to call him El Jefe, was a guy called Sean Murphy, right? So this is about a particular day we were out with the guide showing us around the place in a small van. Memories of El Jefe and the Cuban Revolution. Our guide is giving us a potted history of the revolution as we make our way from Havana to Playa Girón, sipping happily along the empty highway in a small blue bus. Each monument we pass evokes a stirring anecdote featuring heavily outnumbered Fidelistas defeating the reactionary hirelings of Batista. At length, his heroic litany exhausted, he calls for questions. Sean, our leader, pipes up. Where can we get mass? And that's exactly what he said. And the guy was like, But see, it's an Irish question. Irish people go abroad, and the first thing they ask is, where can we get mass?
So now we need the German, I think.
Uh-huh.
I think we need the German, don't we?
Oh, yes. Stop. Sorry.
Thanks. Erinnerung an El Jefe und die kubanische Revolution. Unser Reisebegleiter bietet uns eine kurze Geschichte der Revolution auf unserem Weg von Havanna nach Playa Girón, vergnügt dahinsausend über die leere Schnellstraße in einem kleinen blauen Bus. Jedes Denkmal, das wir passieren, evoziert eine rührende Anekdote über Fidelistas in absoluter Unterzahl, die Batistas reaktionäre Söldlinge besiegen. Als seine heroische Litanei schließlich ein Ende hat, bittet er um Fragen. Sean, unser Leiter, meldet sich zu Wort. Wo können wir an der Messe teilnehmen?
Yes, he told him afterwards. He said you can go to the cathedral. There's plenty of masses in the cathedral. But speaking of mass, this is called Among Thieves. And it's dedicated to Michael O'Riordan, who was the head of the Irish Communist Party for many years.
The last communist left in Europe, I was told.
So yeah, the last Stalin.
Well, there are one or two I could mention, but we won't.
We won't. Among thieves. There are pickpockets in the cathedral, warned the bishop. They may get to your purses before we do, muttered the worried priest.
Unter Dieben. In der Kathedrale sind Taschendiebe, warnte der Bischof. Sie könnten vor uns an euren Geldbeuteln sein, murmelte der besorgte Priester.
And we'll do one more, okay? Talking on yourselves, then. This is called Would You Believe It? And it's based on a poem by Greg Delancey and a subsequent poem by Louis Dupuy. So it's kind of after, it's kind of, 3 steps down from the original poem. The rain has stopped, the wind has stalled, the sky is crystal clear. The clampers have driven off with the car bomb.
Könnt ihr das glauben? Der Regen hat aufgehört, es herrscht Windstille, der Himmel ist kristallklar, die Krallen sind weggefahren mit der Autobombe.
Thank you, lads.
Thank you indeed.
Questions?
I said I wasn't going to ask a question, but I am going to ask a question because that last poem, because you mentioned Louis Dupuy, and doing most of the stuff that I do in Irish, I'm more familiar with Louis Dupuy, Colin Branagh, than I would be perhaps with Greg Delancey.
Yeah.
But I feel there's a sort of a similarity between what you do and what I find Louis and Colin are doing, and indeed Gabriel Rosenstock.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Liam Mac. So my question is there sort of a Cork poetic discourse? Is there a Cork style?
I'm beginning to think there is actually when you mention those people, and you could bring Greg into that as well.
Yeah.
Tom McCarthy, yes and no, because he's I mean, he's living in Cork for 40 years, but he still talks about the fact that he's from Waterford, and
Right.
Waterford is his,
Yeah.
even though a lot of his material comes from Cork now. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Would you like to take that a little further, Gerry, and say what might be the aspects of this Cork thing? Because I think it exists.
I think it could be that second city syndrome as well, you know, that there's a certain, you know, there's a certain thing about the, the whole idea of Cork being the real capital, I thought that's completely nuts. You know, we used to have the real Taoiseach, as they say.
Yeah, Jack Lynch, yeah.
But then people were saying Cork is the real capital, and I think that's nuts, that's just...
Even from the literary point of view. And not being facetious now,
No.
that's a genuine observation.
And, you know, I would say there's equally, you know, the amount of publishers in Cork now as well. You know, as John Monty used to say to us, to live in Cork and have a Dublin publisher was the best of both worlds. You know?
He was serious, wasn't
Oh, he was serious, yeah. And, you know, I was lucky enough to have a Dublin publisher for many years. But I think just that kind of rebellious streak is in the, and we run through all those people you've mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, funnily enough, that particular poem about the car bomb, Greg Dennanty has a very gentle poem about the CND and the balloons going off into the sky. I wrote something else about giving that a bit of a twist, and then Louis wrote something about my poem, and then that sort of summing up the four. So, like one from the other.
Yeah.
You know, the cow and the calf and the...
Yeah. So there's a community which might not
it's-
exist in other places the way it does in Cork.
I'd say because of the size of the place as well, you know, that there's only very few places. O'Vale is one of the places, the Munster Literature Centre. So you have, you know, you're bound to meet the other writers in Cork. It probably is the same in Dublin too. I mean,
I'm out of Dublin now for a number of years. I don't know whether that's the same.
But
I
I
think
mean,
we
you
could
would
include
be-
Conal Creedon in that as well. And,
oh yeah,
and the thing of place, that thing that you get so much in Irish, the place. And it's not just pride of place, it's just a love of place.
yeah. And as somebody says, if you describe your place well enough, well then it's universal.
Yes.
Anyone can understand
Yes.
this, you know, because we all come from some village.
Yes. You must be parochial in the beginning to become, what is it, international or
International,
cosmopolitan in the
exactly,
end. George knows. Jürgen, with such a wide experience of translation and poetry and that, do you feel that there might be a Cork style or a Cork literary entity?
I don't know, not for literature, I don't know, poetry, I don't know, but I was artist in residency in 2017 at the guest house in Cork, and what impressed me the most is that contrary to cities like Berlin or Belfast or other cities, there's not this, people are working together, like poets and writers and musicians, and there's not this, look, he's doing this, and why shouldn't I do this? In this, which was very fascinating. So being in the guest house, and people like musicians would come, writers would come, poets would come. The local bat expert was there. There was an expert in growing shiso, and on all this, and which was very fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just more or less like a German notion of Gesamtkunstwerk.
We're getting back to Wagner now, aren't we?
But talking about Gesamtkunstwerk, you have to mention that there's a third contributor to this book, which is Micky Donnelly, late Micky Donnelly, Belfast artist, and so you see some illustrations in here. And I had known Micky for since 1989 and organized a couple of shows for him in Germany and translated his excellent novel Double Time into German. And his former wife, Noreen O'Hare, she found out that we've been born on the same day. And I don't know how she and myself, we were walking along the street and said, tell me when were you born? And she said, I said, well, this date. And she said, ah. So I thought, because I don't know why, but looking back, I think Micky and myself, we didn't see us that often, but there was a certain bond or a certain connection, which is, there's no real explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But one point is that, like all the three of us,
On the same year.
born the same year or years, and as far as if I'm remember well, you're born also 52.
You do remember well, Jürgen.
So this is.
And
So this is.
Vladimir Putin is 1952 as well.
Oh, really?
Oh, so,
What were the stars doing?
we should get in touch with them. Sort of, come
Yeah,
on.
well, we've no control over
They're
that.
disgracing us.
Are there any questions from anybody else? I'm sure there are. Plenty.
There's a question actually for Jürgen from one of our students who's watching online, and he was wondering how long typically would it take you to translate one of Gerry's poems?
Oh, it depends. Some are there within minutes, and take a very long time, like lying on my desk, and then I go through them again. But I started the project during the pandemic, because knowing I wouldn't be able to go to Ireland, I wouldn't meet too many people who speak English. I thought, what do I do? And so Gerry was posting a poem, nearly a poem a day on Facebook. So I decided will start my day with translating a poem. So this is how it came about. But about the time it takes, it's very hard to tell. Sometimes it's there within no time, but then it might take weeks before it's completed.
Mm-hmm.
What causes
But normally I have a list of incompetence, or what I call a list of incompetence. But I think I didn't send any questions to you, did I?
No. we saw some out with it. Cork Guinness introduced myself and Jürgen. Because Jürgen was Colin's translator, and he sent one of my books to Jürgen a few years ago now. And that's how the whole thing started up, and a couple of magazines in Berlin and so on and so forth. Before this came out, he had placed my book in 2 or 3 magazines in Berlin. So.
But the story, this list of incompetence is really interesting. There is this Sean McCuffin from Belfast, whose books I have translated. When I sent him the list, he always answered pages and pages and pages, starting little do you know. And therefore, just of curiosity, I added many things to the list of incompetence, although I knew what it was about.
Okay.
Is that what causes the great, like if you're going to take a week, say, or more with a particular poem, is that what causes the delay, these incompetencies, as you might call them, as you call them, things you're not able to resolve? What causes the delay? If you're saying, okay, I can do that in maybe an hour or an afternoon, but then the others, there's something that's stopping the fluency. What are those things that stop the fluency?
It's mainly to do with my own language,
Mm-hmm.
to find the proper words, or which I think, which are the proper words or the proper notions or whatever. It's not, or sometimes about what is it, what we are calling colloquial or something. What is it about? So you have to ask but it's more or less to do with coming to terms with your own language, and not with the source language.
I have an example of that. Was, I had a small selected work came out in. Oh, my God. Sally Cabinet.
You better be careful.
Yeah.
So you were saying that?
I had a small selected works came out in Macedonia in 2019, and the translator was messaging me on Facebook. There was one particular poem where the word clap came into it, right? It was something about God was sending down Joseph Clapp, the priest. It's a poem based on Rambo. We won't go into it now, but the word clap was used. So she said, "Do you mean applause?" I said, "No, I mean sexual transmitted disease." I mean, if she hadn't said it to me, she would have completely,
Oh, yes.
Sure.
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
so.
So that's the problem with the source language.
Yeah,
and Jürgen is
and colloquialisms,
problem.
and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Really.
I got a question about the public voice of the poet. This, often people talk about a lot of contemporary Irish poetry, talk about the lyric, becomes a small lyric poem. But a lot of the poems that you read tonight are kind of they're public poems in many ways. And there's a long tradition in Irish from that to Philip Mccoy and that where
Yeah,
the poet was somebody in the community, somebody who kind of was a spokesperson, and also where satire was so important because that was a public use of verse to kind of to speak truth to power or to tell power
Yeah.
they owed them a few bob and produced in time. So I mean, it's very sensitive in your writing that there's that sense of you as a public.
well, yeah, I mean, in the sense of something with story, some politician making a statement, or as in the case of the poem about Nook. I mean, that was actually the description. I just took it further and further because they kept talking about one thing was behind, another behind, and I just kept going out and out until I got as far as Stalin behind the Cathedral of Minsk, which is not in the actual description, but anyway. But something with story, just politicians, a lot of the time, or something, it can be something quite simple. I won't mention names. I do remember I have a chapbook. This is called My Life as a Stalinist. And I was walking in the street in Cork, and Micheál Martin was walking down towards me. I know him of old because he used to come to their readings long before he was a TD, So he had an interest in the arts. He was coming towards me, and I said, "Oh, I have a new book for you." And he took it, and he looked at it. He looked at the cover, and he went. Yes, and then he proceeded to tell me that his uncle had been out in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, fighting for the International Brigade. This is, his uncle was a communist, but but it's the way he did it, like, it's like, go stick this into your pocket quick. But yeah.
See, the Taoiseach is also very conscious of the public impression he's creating.
Those very close,
Yeah.
Oh.
So may I have a question?
Yes.
No.
I must say, I'm totally new to your poetry. So it's very interesting for me to hear about the Cork style or the reaction to Irish events. But another thing which is very interesting for me is the wide frame of references to poets, and this is far beyond Irish literature, right? So I'm just wondering, in what ways do you choose the poets you react to?
I've been reacting to poets from all over the world for years, and sometimes it can be, and after can be something like one line of their poem and sends you off in it's like a bounce, you bounce off their line and riff on it, if you like, and that sort of jazz sense, or like you can actually just, not so much translation, but you can adapt their poem to your own situation. But what was the last one? I have a new collection here, which if anybody wants to take it home. It's called the Humours of Nothingness. There's a poem in that about the French poet Villon, François Villon. It's if I can find it. It was. Let's shoot up and say it. Come on, lads. There we go. 59. So something you read about a particular person, some life event or something, and it would give you and this is tiny. It's called an epitaph. François Villon, the finest poet ever to have killed a priest in a knife fight. That's true. He actually got, well, he didn't get away with it, but he claimed that the priest attacked him first. So he was sent out of Paris for a few years, but he was, they said, okay, yeah, grand, self-defense, yeah. But,
Is that a picture of you on the cover?
half of you.
Half of you.
Half of me. Are you done with your action? We're finished. What do you have?
Sorry?
I leave that with you after.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, thank you so much. Yeah, sure.
But
it's true that I worked as a teacher in Leeds, and it's true that there's a humour in me that isn't very often recognised by other countries. And Cork humour tends to be recognised, but Meath humour doesn't. But at the same time, there's no question about it, but the teachers in the schools, I suppose, are aware of it and maybe play a little bit to it. And do you think that has happened maybe to a much more extensive extent in Cork, and that's why we're seeing a Cork?
possibly, yeah. I'm trying to remember particular teachers. Even going back to primary school, there was a guy who used to come in, our teacher, and he'd read out stuff from the newspaper. Of course, stuff that was topical, but he would give it his own little slant, and things like that would stay with you. Yeah. But it's also you're using humour in a particular way to undermine some view that you think is crazy, So it can become very useful. There is I know when I was writing first, there was a lot of opposition to humour. It was like, you have to be serious when you're writing, you have to, or the muse has come down upon you. I won't mention names, but I had a few people who came to me when I was writing first and saying, you want to start becoming serious about your work. I was saying, I am serious about my work, I'm just not serious about the actual material, But, it was always seen as something less than the serious Yeats. And
You have a very nice tone there, Gerry, about, I think it's called Why I Write Poetry. And I don't know whether you'd like to read it. It's a little long, maybe. But it is good as response to
What are you doing? What are you doing?
what is my index here?
What's that?
8.
Huh? 8. Well, if
Oh,
you
yeah.
have it there, you
Oh,
can
yeah.
give that to Gerry.
Okay. Why I am a poet? Is it down to my father's habit of smoking sweet afternoon cigarettes and my reading and rereading Burns' lovely couplet on the packet, flow gently sweet afternoon among thy green braes, flow gently I sing thee a song and thy praise? Was my Uncle Paddy soaring on those kite-like tropes of Omer Khayyam between gulps of mulled porter? Or my mother squirreling away those hurriedly scribbled notes beneath the sofa cushions, which I would often find but could never quite get? Verses from our own lost rubaiyat. Before you read that, I had just gone back a few years, I was out running with a few friends on a Sunday morning and I met my old Irish teacher from primary school. And there was about 4 of us and he said, "Garro the Maracu." I said, "Mr. Begley, how are you?" And he said, "This is now about maybe 10 years ago." And I had about 5 or 6 books out and so on. He said, "Did you know your mother was a poet?" What? And I said, "No, nobody ever said." He said, "Well, she was," and he walked off. I said, "You can't just say something like that and then walk off." He said, "Well, yeah, no, what?" And I was asking her, my aunt at the time, I was saying, "Yeah, she was very good at school. She used to, and she used to write very funny letters, but poems. I never discovered that." But he was quite adamant. He said, that your mother was a poet. I said,
Yeah. It's not from the ground you got
no,
it.
he said you didn't take it off a stone. He said. And that would have been her sense of humour as well. It was kind of always like.
So before Jürgen reads that, there's 2 things I think happening in that poem. You're talking about the sound of the music and versus. I mean, my father smoked sweet afton too, and I read this little motto on the.
That's right, yeah.
And there's that music, and then there's the rubaiyat and somebody reciting that. But then I felt at the end that your mother, there was some sort of self-expression happening.
Yeah, but she was hiding it as well.
And she was hiding it.
Yeah.
And do you think there's a sort of difference between poetry that is, as Verlaine would say, all music, that music is the most important thing? That's on the one hand. And then there's this, I want to say something. There's an expression, there's something, as you say, you're responding to something.
Yeah, I would be stronger in my work than the actual music.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I've listened to Yeats talking about the fact that I took a great deal of trouble to put these things together, and I don't want to read like prose, you know, that sort of.
Yes, like prose.
But anyway.
Yeah. But anyway, Jürgen.
Anyway.
Sorry.
Warum ich Dichter bin, liegt es letzten Endes an der Gewohnheit meines Vaters, Sweet-Afton-Zigaretten zu rauchen und daran, dass ich Burns hübsches Couplet auf der Packung gelesen und immer wieder gelesen habe. Fließe sanft, holder Aften, am grünenden Rhein, dieses sanft, ein Lobeslied soll gewidmet dir sein. Lag es an meinem Onkel Paddy, zwischen Schluckenschalen Porters schwebend, auf den drachengleichen Tropen von Omar Khayyam, oder an meiner Mutter, die flugs niedergeschriebenen Notizen unter den Sofakissen verbarg, Notizen, die oft ich fand, doch nie recht verstand, Verse aus ihrer eigenen verschollenen Rubaiyat.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think yes.
No, I was
Okay.
gonna say
Yeah.
we're
Oh,
back.
sorry. Yeah. I thought there was another question. I got mixed up with the codes. Yeah.
Thanks for coming, by the way.
Yeah.
All of you.
I'd like to finish up, just if you don't mind, the 2 of you. Like we said, we've covered great ground, I think, and I've learned an immense amount just listening to the 2 of you, and I'm suitably, I won't say humiliated, that's not the word, I'm suitably humble, whatever it is. Anyway, I was wondering, would you both, not together, but one after the other, say something about, in your case, if you like, poetry and if you want a translation, and then certainly in your case, Jürgen, about translation, like just could you sort of sum up what it's all about? In how long is it?
About 2 minutes each. Two
2.5 minutes each. Well, no, you did refer to this thing of which I find a very big impediment about poetry because I write in prose.
Yeah.
This thing of you must be serious. Poetry's the greatest art and all this. Sort of. That's obviously not quite how you see it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I've always been, since I started, I've always been coming at it from a different angle and shattering, myths about it. Because just the people, I was part of a workshop in UCC. We had people like Montague would come around and bless us now and again. We'd have visiting people like Heaney and so on and so forth. So there was a certain kind of enormous sacredness about it, and I came in to that particular atmosphere and shattered it, basically. Because I remember one particular night I brought in a new poem, and I was winding them up with the poem, but it got to the stage where two members of the workshop were inviting each other outside to have a fist fight, because one said that's the poem and the other said didn't, it's not. So it got to that stage in the workshop, you're thinking. So they decided to go to Professor Lucy and to do his, become a Solomon and say.
He was the professor of English, was he?
He was, yeah. So he said, yes, it is a poem, but he is winding you up.
He was a pretty good critic.
He was Solomon. What these? Oh, God Almighty, just, they would talk about things like I was sitting at my table and I had a pen and all of a sudden came to me and you're kind of going, back off that. Stop.
Yeah. Good.
It's bad enough saying it, but I'm probably believing it too.
Yeah, that's the worst of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you actually believe it.
Believe that sort of stuff. I mean, there's a sort of a sense of, when you talk about inspiration, it's only when you look back at the poem that you realise something happened, but you can't actually, you can't go looking for it in that sense,
Yeah.
I think as Michael Longley said, if I knew where the poems came from, I'd go and live there. So basically. But that's my 2 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
Talking about translation, yes. I have this, the French philosopher Jacques Derrida has written a brilliant book about James Joyce, especially about Ulysses, and he mentions Finnegan's Wake as well. It's called Ulysses Gramophone, and in it he says, and I couldn't find it in English, so I had to make up a translation from the German version and from my poor French. So it says in Ulysses Gramophone that human beings have to come up with what is missing in the revelation of God to be a totality. This, Derrida continues, is what we call translation. And trying to do this, we are doomed to failure. So we are, as translators, we could be happy because we are getting paid being failures.
Can we quote Beckett?
Yes.
Fail again, fail better.
Yes. Is that what you're doing, Jürgen? Every translation you're failing better?
Fail
Yes,
better.
trying to.
Trying to.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you both very much. That's been
Thank
a
you.
great evening. And I certainly have enjoyed it, and I'm sure everybody else has.
Just on behalf of the Centre, I'd like to thank Liam Mac Cóil for doing a very good job of comparing the evening. Personally, I should have mentioned when we were in conjunction with Literature Ireland and the inception of translations, the late great Lara Cassidy, an inspirational literature officer in the Arts Council, but who was very much involved in getting this project off the ground. But I remember meeting Lar one time on his way to Houston Station. He was looking very, very worried. I said, so where are you going? He says, I'm going to Cork. And he says, you know what I call it when I go to Cork? And I says, well, it's called the Bell and Law Mission. He says, every time I go down there, I get ambushed by poets. You know? So I think this tradition of kind of poetic ambush has been brilliantly illustrated tonight. And I was also thinking as well of that image you were using, Gerry, of kind of the hands and then looking up for inspiration. And of course, one thing that happens in the Bible is they looked up and tongues of flame came down and they walked out. And then Jürgen Schneider is one of our kind of prophets who went out into the street of Berlin, you know, and preaching Gerry's good word. You know? So we're very grateful to. So thank you much, everybody, and thanks everybody for coming along, and also thanks to the virtual audience for joining us this evening. We're very much appreciative of your participation.